evening, our dear viewers. Today is the first Sunday of Advent in the Catholic world, and we gather this evening to have a discussion on the topic why those who are married customarily in the church but haven't performed the sacramental rite of marriage are not allowed to receive Holy Communion. We have in our midst two distinguished personalities. I'll humbly invite them to kindly introduce themselves to us. I am your host, Dixon Nukunu Abuchi, and joining me for the program is Brother
James Junior.
So beginning from my immediate right, I'll call on the first gentleman to humbly introduce himself to us.
Thank you. My name is Dr. Yao Sakwadie Ajiban. I'm a teacher in African traditional religion and comparative religion at the University of Cape Coast, specifically at the Department of Religion and Human Values. I'm also a part-time lecturer at this honorable seminary, St. Peter's Seminary, and I've been teaching here for the past 20 years. I teach comparative religion and also African traditional religion in the seminary. Thank you, viewers.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sarkodie. You are welcome. We'd like to hear from our second guest.
So good evening to you, our viewers. I'm Reverend Father Joseph Opon, the priest of the Diocese of Konango-Mampong, and a lecturer at the University of Cape Coast, specifically at the Department of Religion and Human Values, where I teach courses in religion, ethics, and critical thinking. And for the past 7 years, I've also been a part-time lecturer here at St. Peter's Regional Seminary, taking courses in Trinity and the Christian Sacrament of Marriage. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Opong, and then Dr. Sarkodie. You are all welcome once again.
Welcome.
So to set the ball rolling, we want to know why some members of the church who are married traditionally, as we call it, are not admitted to Holy Eucharist when they haven't performed the sacramental rite of marriage. But to begin, we want to first understand what marriage actually is from the traditional point of view and then from the Christian perspective as well. So beginning with Dr. Sarkodie, could you tell us a bit about what marriage is in our traditional context?
Thank you. Marriage is one of the respected institutions in traditional Africa. And it is a form of union between a man and a woman and the family of the man and the woman. And in order to understand what I mean by family, there's a need for us to explain something concerning family in indigenous Africa. The family in indigenous Africa consists of the living and the dead. And therefore, when we talk about family, the dead in a family, who are called the ancestors, are part of the family. And in some cultures, even the gods of the family are part of the family. And therefore, when it comes to marriage, it is not only two people who are coming together, but the family, both living and the dead, and even the gods of the couples who are coming into marriage. So that is the understanding of marriage, a union between a man and a woman and the families. And I've taken my time to explain what we mean by family in indigenous Africa.
Thank you, Doctor. Father, could we hear from you on marriage in the Christian perspective?
Thank you. From the Christian perspective, specifically the Catholic perspective, marriage is seen to be a bond of friendship, kind of a union, a covenant. It is a gift of God uniting a man and a woman physically and also spiritually. marriage is seen to be an image of the unity between Christ and his church. In the Code of Canon Law, the church teaches us, so we came to learn from Canon 1055, paragraph 1, that marriage is a covenant by which a man and a woman establish between themselves a partnership of their whole life, and which of its very nature is ordered to the well-being of the spouses and to the procreation and upbringing of children. And this union has been raised by Christ to the level of a sacrament between those who are baptized. So in the Catholic understanding, marriage is a covenant, marriage is a sacrament, and marriage is a vocation. It became a sacrament as far back as the year 1184 at the Council of Verona. The church pronounced that marriage is a sacrament. It is a serious commitment, and to covenant is to commit oneself radically and solemnly. So a man and a woman come together in a union of friendship, physically and spiritually, and this is said to be marriage.
Thank you, Father. Father, talking about marriage as a sacrament, what specifically will you hint on to make us understand what you mean by marriage as a sacrament?
When we say marriage is a sacrament, we're referring to the fact that marriage can be a sign, marriage can be an institution, a union that points Christ to the world. Married persons, through their union, give witness to the world. It becomes a kind of an evangelizing instrument or a channel to those who are married, just like priests serving the church through their priesthood and witnessing to the church. Those who are married also give witness through their marriage to the world and to their children. That's why we say it's a sacrament. It points to Christ.
All right. Having established these facts about marriage, Dr. Sarkodie, you mentioned that marriage is not just between the man and the woman, but the family is involved, including the dead. Could you help us understand what essential elements would be considered in the traditional sector to consider that union a marriage?
You know, in the traditional sector, it differs from culture to culture. In Africa, we have several cultures, and therefore there's not one specific or laid down rules for marriage. It depends on the culture. But there are certain essential elements that we look at for when we are talking about marriage. The first one is that the man and the woman must agree that there must be consent from the two people who intend to marry. And the second one is that it goes to the family. The consent must also be sought from the family, from the man's family, and especially from the girl's family, the woman's family, that they want to marry. And if this agreement is done, then there's a third component when it comes to marriage in indigenous Africa: the performance of customary rites. The customary rites differ from culture to culture, and therefore I won't be specific concerning what to do in order to consider the appropriate customary rite. But every culture has its own appropriate customary rites, and when these rites are performed, then marriage is legal and accepted, as they haven't gone through every necessary rite for the marriage to become a union.
All right. So getting you, meaning that the essential elements required is based upon the culture one finds himself.
Yes.
Basically. Thank you, Doctor. Father Pong, in the same tangent, could you hit on the essential elements that constitute marriage in the Christian world, specifically the Catholic Church?
Well, also in the Catholic context, we cannot overlook this whole concept of matrimonial consent. Very, very important. Since the 13th century, the scholastics have built around this, and the church till today still looks up to this. This makes marriage what it is, the matrimonial consent. The two people marrying, the man and the woman, must freely express their willingness to enter into this kind of marriage. It is not something from the family. It is something that the officiating priest would want to ask from the man and the woman. Do they freely give their consent? And that's what makes marriage. And so without the matrimonial consent, we can't talk about marriage in the Catholic context. Very, very important, very, very crucial. So this is something we need to take note of. Matrimonial consent, very, very important. And that is why in the celebration, priests and those who are around would need to pray for those who are exchanging this consent. You go to many weddings, and it looks like that is where people they run commentaries. And sometimes I feel a bit uncomfortable. They are making a solemn pledge. They are giving their consent. And we need to pray for them so that they can live out the promise, the pledge that they are offering to each other. So matrimonial consent is something very, very crucial in Christian or Catholic marriage.
So we have underscored the fact that matrimonial consent is very crucial, a crucial element. And I think in the traditional sector too, Dr. Sarkodie has made us understand that it's also a very important element. So coming from these two angles, there's a form of an agreement over there.
Right.
Now, if that is the case, asking from the church's point of view, does the church acknowledge customary marriage or traditional marriage as a marriage?
Yeah, the church does recognize traditional marriage. In fact, it is a requirement. A priest cannot go on and officiate at a marriage ceremony without making sure that the man and the woman have gone through the traditional customary marriage. So the church does recognize that. But that alone is not enough, like probably we're going to touch on, for one's admission to receiving the Holy Eucharist. And so it's very important for us to understand that the church does recognize traditional or customary marriage first, before we can go on and have the church celebrating that marriage.
I'll come back to that point. Dr. Sarkodie, please, can you tell us a bit about the purpose of marriage in our traditional context?
Throughout traditional Africa, the main purpose of marriage is procreation. That is the main purpose of marriage. However, in several instances, marriage can be used for other purposes. To seal friendship among people, among families. For example, somebody may like a person, or somebody may like a community, and they may decide to marry from a particular family in order to seal that friendship. The friendship can even go beyond. It may be between two ethnic groups. They may also marry to seal the relationship that they have between the two ethnic groups. And there are instances that marriage also have been done for political purpose. Because sometimes for political alliance, people from royal families may decide to contract marriage so that the union between the two royal families can become solid. So it can be used for that purpose. There may be other non-essential use of marriage, but one of them is to get labor, in order to get large labor force to work. So marriage can also be done so that the offspring can also provide labor. In the past, where farming and fishing and other things were going on, this may also be this and there. But the prime focus of marriage in indigenous Africa is for procreation. That's the prime focus.
Thank you, Doctor. In the issue of political reasons, is consent still valid?
I must say that consent, in principle, is very paramount in any form of marriage. However, there are instances that the welfare of the community may override the consent of a partner. There are instances that this thing can happen over there. However, even in this, the consent is, but because of the communal interest, sometimes you find instances where the consent may not be all that strong.
Okay, given that analogy, if we have an issue with the consent, will you still consider that arrangement marriage?
Yes, in Jesus Africa, it's marriage. Because sometimes the understanding is that they may grow to love one another. Because there are instances that infants have even been married in the form of betrothal. Somebody can look at a child and say that when the child grows up, I would like to marry her or him for my relative or for my child. At that very moment, the child, so innocent, the child will not even understand marriage. But when the child grows up, becomes mature, then the proper rituals are done. So like somebody just taking the initiative to make sure that nobody marries this child because of certain good characteristics the person may have seen in a family or may have seen in a community. And because they cherish such values, they may decide that certainly I would like to have somebody from my family to marry into your family. And they may start friendship till the time that the child may be of the same. There are instances where the child becomes mature, the child can say no. It creates problems because sometimes money must have been spent in taking care of the child. But the consent is important because there are instances at the age of maturity, one party will say, no, I don't want it. And nobody can force him or her to marry.
This has cleared the notion for us that sometimes people are forced into marriage traditionally. Okay. We would like to also find out, the traditional marriage, does it permit divorce? And if it does, why?
In the traditional marriage, across Africa, allows divorce. And there are certain grounds where divorce is permitted. One of them is unfaithfulness, especially on the part of the woman. The traditional understanding why that of the woman is stressed is that pregnancy, when pregnancy comes in outside the marriage, it creates problem for the man. And therefore, try as much as possible that the woman should not involve himself in extramarital relationship. The other thing is lack of respect on the part of the woman, on the part of the man. And it is not only the man who can seek for divorce. The woman can also seek for divorce. And therefore, divorce can come at the instance of the woman saying that, no, I'm not interested in the marriage. For example, it may be because the man has been abusing the woman. The man is not able to take good care of the woman. The man is irresponsible. The man is an alcoholic. All these things, the woman can seek for divorce. And therefore, there are customary rights of doing this. But any kind of divorce, there must be arbitration. One cannot just get and say that I'm not going to marry. The process of contracting the marriage, the same process must be used in order to bring the marriage to an end. It goes through arbitration. And Akan people have a saying that Awaregu Nkrobo. That means the elders must sit down in front, bring that to an end. But divorce is not taken lightly because there are instances they will call for separation for a number of years. Because there are instances where after the separation, after some time, the two of them will come to agreement and come together. And therefore, they don't rush to just cancel or annul the marriage. I use my father as an example. My father had a wife, and when I was born, there was separation. And the woman stayed outside the marriage. They stayed for about 30 years. And when the woman died, my father was asked to come and perform the rituals as a husband. And therefore, divorce is not something that indigenous Africans rush into this and there. Separation may be granted after some time. But after a long time, if each party insists on having this the divorce, they will not prevent you from going out of the marriage. But it's something which is not taken lightly. Because of the understanding of marriage as a union, not only of two people, but also their families and their ancestors. And therefore, to ask for divorce, you are asking for separation of all these kind of people, entities. And therefore, traditional Africans take divorce very, very, very serious.
Thank you, Doctor. The last question for you. We understand that sometimes there are multiple partners in marriage. What would account for that?
Let me say that a man marrying more than one is not something unique to indigenous Africa. It seems that in the past that was the norm in most cultures. And decide to do that. And there are several reasons that may push a man to do that. One of them may be the fact that the woman is not able to give birth. That can compel the man to take a second wife to do this and that. And there are sometimes also maybe status symbol. To have more than one wife shows that you are wealthy, and you are responsible. That is why you can take care of many wives. And the other one is something which I have said already. In order to get more hands to work on the farm. That also can compel a man to marry more women in order to get more hands to work. But let me illustrate something with the Akan one. The man may decide to have a second wife, but often, traditionally, it must be done with the consent of the first wife. The first wife has a big say. If she says no and go ahead to marry, you have shown disrespect to your first wife. She may even decide who you should marry, because sometimes you may take a woman and the first wife can say that, for example, she is disrespectful, and therefore I don't want her in the family. So the consent of the first wife is very, very, very important. And even after she has agreed to the marriage, you need to compensate her. You pay compensation to her. And the subsequent wife, that also she has a role to play, your subsequent wife. And they try as much as possible to come together to form a family. Often though, reverence is there, but as much as possible, a union is established among co-wives. But there are instances where problems, certainly like any human institution and relationship, problems come here and there. For example, my father tried as much as possible to move his children to stay with the co-wives. You will not stay with your mother, you go to your stepmother, and your stepmother's children also will be with your mother. And there was this kind of idea that we saw all my father's wives as our mother. It was one of them who raised me up. And my mother also raised other people's children. And therefore, if you try to maltreat somebody's child, remember your child may be with another person. So, yes, multiple partners, multiple wives are allowed. And you have to go through the same process of marrying. And as I've given you reasons for marriage, the multiple partners may be also for some of these reasons, political and other reasons of marriage.
All right, thank you. The point on multiple partners you've well explained and elaborated on it. But my interest is on the issue about the women. You were categorically clear on the fact that women cannot go in for multiple husbands, but the men are allowed to. Could you give us any reason for that?
I think in my discussion, I made mention of the idea of childbirth. A man does not get pregnant, as we know.
Sure.
It's the woman who gets pregnant. And therefore, if the woman gets pregnant and I'm married to her, and she also has another one, husband somewhere or a partner somewhere, whose child will that be? It creates problem for the child. It can make the child to become illegitimate child. The child will not have a father because both partners may disclaim the child, that the child is not mine. He also is not mine. Then the child will become the child of the mother. And therefore, as much as possible, this is avoided. And when you look at the customary rights, you are supposed to pay something to the family. So to speak, when you pay the dowry and other things there, she moves to be part of your family. And therefore to go out to have an affair with another person may be tantamount to breaking the union and the terms of the union. Because marriage is a union. And my colleague here also used the Bible to explain what we mean by the sacrament and other things there. So this kind of contract, the man has the sole right to the sexual right of the woman, per the terms of the contract. No other person could have sex with the woman, apart from the man who has paid for her dowry. So if the woman goes out of the marriage to have any sexual relationship, she is breaking the terms of the contract. So it's a legal union and it has its own terms. And when they are contracted the marriage, these terms are clearly defined and stated to the two parties. The man has a right to have sex with you. He's supposed to show you love. He's obliged to do this thing for you, the woman. And you also, these are your rights and obligations. And per the rights and obligations, as part of the contract that was signed when they were performing the customary rights, especially among the Khan, the man has the sole right to have sex with the woman. No other person can do that. And it's a ground for divorce if the man so wishes.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Sarkodie. Father Pong, we left on the issue about the church recognizing the customary marriage, and you affirm that it does recognize it and even requires that it is performed prior to the sacramental one. Father, in that angle, what is the main issue about the church not allowing its members who have performed the traditional marriage to receive the Holy Eucharist?
Well, the church does not allow members who have gone through the customary rites to receive Holy Eucharist because it looks like the traditional setting or the union from the traditional context and the Christian context are understood from different perspectives. Meaning in a traditional context, if a man should marry a woman, there could be divorce, like my colleague said. But in the church, especially in the Catholic Church, the word divorce is not in our vocabulary. We want to talk about annulment. In the traditional marriage, there is an understanding that if the woman is unable to bear children, the man can go in for a second wife. That is not the case in the Catholic tradition. If the woman cannot bear children, that will not be a ground for divorce. And so the church would recognize traditional marriages, but the church would not allow those who have not celebrated their marriages in church to receive the Holy Eucharist. Because Marriage represents Jesus Christ, the union between Christ and his church. So if a couple are having that kind of relationship, they must go through the form recognized by the church. And the form recognized by the church is that this marriage must be celebrated in church before a priest or a deacon and 2 witnesses. That is why the church does not allow people who have married traditionally to receive the Holy Eucharist. They must go through the tradition of the church. And the tradition of the church is that it must be before a priest or a deacon and 2 witnesses. And there is no dissolution. And so when you ask about the elements of Catholic marriage, we speak about consent. But there is also these component parts, unity and indissolubility. In Catholic marriage, once the marriage is celebrated and consummated, there can be no dissolution. But in traditional marriage, there can be dissolution, as my colleague explained. And that is the more reason why the church does not allow those who have undergone the traditional marriage just to walk in and receive the Holy Eucharist.
Father, prior to that, these people have been receiving the Eucharist.
Okay.
What's changed all of a sudden?
What changed is the fact that now they have married traditionally, but not in the church. And that is a very good point. We must also know many Catholics are not very conversant with this. Those who are single now and go to communion, 18, 19, 20, 25, you go to communion as a lady. The gentleman goes to communion as a man. But once you start relating as husband and wife, you can't go to communion. Whether you are married or not married, you can't go to communion. Some think because I've been going to communion since I was 7 or 8, I'm now 25, I'm having sex with a man, but I can still go to communion. No, you can't go to communion. So what has changed is that this man and this woman have taken on a new role. They are now husband and wife traditionally, but they are not recognized as married, so to speak, in the eyes of the church. That is why they can't receive communion. So it's not only for those who have married traditionally, but even for those who have not married but are engaging in sex, they can't go to communion. They can't receive the Eucharist. And for those who for one reason or the other are not married but engage in sex, they have to go to confession before they can go to communion. If it becomes a routine, then you choose between the Eucharist and that way of life. So you're not married in church, but you are living with a man. Either this whole idea of concubinage or cohabitation, you must stop going to communion. And so it's not only for those who have married traditionally who can't go to communion, but for any young man or young woman who is not married traditionally but is engaging in sex, cannot go to communion.
Father, in the Code of Canon Law, precisely Canon 912 precisely, it is stated that all baptized persons in the church are to be admitted to the sacrament of the Holy Eucharist, except those prohibited by the law itself. With your background in this arena, could you explain those terms in the code for us?
Yeah. You are perfectly right, and I have the code before me. Canon 912. It says, any baptized person who is not forbidden by law may and must be admitted to Holy Communion. So those who are forbidden by law are those who have not married in church. They are forbidden by law. And those who have not married in church and have not married traditionally but are engaged in sex, they are also forbidden by law to go to communion. So it's not only something against those who have married traditionally, but those who are engaged in sex and have not even married traditionally cannot go to communion.
Father, would you agree with me that this particular law is more strict on those who have had customary marriage in relation to the other party you mentioned? I mean, those who are not married, as we know, but are engaged in premarital sex.
You are right. We instruct on them because we know they have married traditionally. And the priest doesn't go around asking, have you had sex? That's why you're not going to communion. The priest doesn't ask that. But for those who are married, we are strict because we know they have married and they have not brought their marriages before the church. That is why it's important for us as priests and also as seminarians to let our people know that this is not only for those who have not married in church, but for those who have marriageable age, who have not married and are engaged in sex, they can't go to communion. But like we said, for those who are married, We know them, the church knows them, they are their husband and wife traditionally. That is why they can't go to church, they can't go to communion. But for young men and young girls who are not married, sometimes they go through the cracks and then go to communion. But we have to let them know that it's not only for those who have married, but for those who have not married traditionally, but are living in concubinage or cohabitation, they can, because they are forbidden by law. And even those who are not also married, even for priests and for religious, if you get yourself involved in sex, you can't go to communion. You must go to confession. So you are forbidden by law. That's why we're saying that if you consider yourself to be in a mortal sin, then you have to go to confession. So it's not only for those who are married. For those who are married traditionally, those who are not married, for priests, for religious, and for all Catholics. If you are not in a state of grace, if you are in mortal sin, you go to confession. So it's not only for those who have married traditionally who can go to communion. For priests, for young men, for young women who have not married but involved in that, they are forbidden by law. They can't go to communion.
Thank you, Father. Father, apart from the aspect of the law, the legal aspect, if we have traditionally married, who are faithful to each other and to the church as well, will you term them to be in the state that they are not in the state of grace? Considering the fact that they have been married traditionally and not performing the sacramental marriage.
Yeah, the church, that is the law of the church. Just like my colleague explained, traditionally, you can't just take hold of a woman and say, she's my wife. You must go through the process. You might be the same way. The church is also a family. And so you have to go through the process. And what's the process? You must come before a priest or a deacon and 2 witnesses. And so yes, a man and a woman may have been married traditionally, they are faithful to each other. But in the eyes of the church, they cannot, because they've not fulfilled the law or the requirements of the church. And so it's for the pastor, it's for priests to encourage those who have married traditionally to bring their marriages before the church. But it appears that many Catholics are scared of coming to the church because of the fact that once the marriage is celebrated in church, there can be no divorce. Yes, many Catholics are scared of that. And they would sometimes even want to find out whether they are compatible, if they have children, 2 or 3 children, before they bring their marriages to church. And so I think pastors of souls need to encourage them that we are a family. These are our laws, that once you are married as husband and wife traditionally, you have to bring your marriage before the church so that the church can regularize it, and then you can receive Holy Eucharist. That's what we need to do.
All right. Father, coming from the angle of Dr. Sarkodie, he made us understand that in traditional marriage, there is room given for multiple partners, especially on the side of the man, that he can take 2 wives or more. Now, if it happens that a member of the church is married to 2 wives or more, but wants to sacramentalize the marriage, what will be the procedure or what will be needed for that to happen?
Well, like I said earlier on, marriage is said to be the image of Christ and the church. The church is one, Christ is one. And so if a man wants to do that, then the man may have to let one of the women go. In the past, it used to be that the oldest would stay on. But now the church has no hand. Now the church will throw it back to the man. You are living with them. So you have to make the choice, either the younger one or the elder one. So one of them have to go. You cannot be faithful to the 2 of them. Because like we said, an essential element of Christian or Catholic marriage is unity and indissolubility. And this has biblical basis. Genesis chapter 2, when Christ says, so a man, and so what we're looking at here is that the man will have to let one of the women go. And then we'll have to bring one of them to church to have the marriage solemnized.
Father, talking about faithfulness, we wouldn't we be so too much in a rush to say that the man cannot be faithful to the 2 wives? Because there have been instances where we have had faithful husbands to more than 1 woman in the marriage context.
Well, we can look at it from that perspective, but what we're looking at is that marriage as an institution, or marriage, like we said, reflects the union between Christ and the church. The church is the bride and Christ is the groom. And the church is one. We don't have 2 churches. Christ is not married to two women. He's married to the church. Yes, there could be faithfulness, like my colleague was saying. Traditionally, some people would argue that there were traditional homes where there were 3 or 4 wives, but they were living in harmony and everything. But again, our point is that the man must pick one of them because of this whole idea of unity and indissolubility. How can the man be united to 2 women? This whole idea of unity does not come out clearly when there are 2 or 3 women out there. Marriage is exclusively between the man and the woman. 1 man and 1 wife. Monogamy is the ideal for Christian marriage. Therefore, the church cannot endorse a man having 2 or 3 wives, claiming, oh, he is faithful to all of them, they are faithful to him. It must be 1 man and 1 woman.
Father, I have a little difficulty. If it is easy for us to say that the 2 become 1, what is the difficulty in saying that the 3 or more can also become 1? Because I understand that in that unity is a mystery. We have 2 persons, but we term them to be 1. I mean, it goes beyond the physical that we see. It has a mysterious angle of it. So if we can confidently say that the 2 become 1, can the possibility not also apply to the 3 or more becoming 1?
No, that cannot be the case, because when you go back to biblical warrant, God created Adam and Eve. So it was 1 man and 1 woman. So we cannot say that, well, there could be the possibility of a man living harmoniously with 2 or 3 women. Therefore, it should happen. It must be 1 man, 1 woman. It is a mystery, like St. Paul would tell us. And this is really it's really carried out or reflected where we have 1 man being in union with 1 woman.
All right. We have some correspondence coming from our social media handles. We'd like to hear from them as well.
Okay, thanks so much. I believe our viewers, wherever you are, you've been enjoying the conversation so far. It is getting very, very interesting and very educative. So far, we've had our 2 panelists talk to us a lot about the topic, and I know questions are teeming in. If you are not yet watching us, we encourage that you join in and watch us, and let us get educated together. Dr. Sarkodie, from social media, I will step in for social media. When you were talking, you made mention of unfaithfulness of women as a ground for divorce in the traditional setting. If you realize that the woman is not faithful, what if the man too is not faithful? One woman is asking what should be done. Can the woman to proceed with divorce?
Unfaithfulness in a traditional setup can be defined as having sex with a woman that a man is not married to. And therefore, if the man has 4 wives and they are all legitimately married to him, you cannot use the term unfaithfulness in this context. However, if the man goes outside these 4 wives to have sex, any of the women can bring a case against him. The woman can go to the head of family to say this and that is what my husband is doing. If repeatedly the husband does not stop, the woman can seek divorce on that ground. So a woman can seek divorce because the man is a womanizer. Where womanizing here means having sex outside marriage. But it is not having sex with 2 or 3 wives that the man has legitimately married.
Thank you so much. That is interesting. Dr. Sarkodie again. Scientific revelations are telling us that an impotency is not only on the side of the woman. Most of the time, 2 couples are together, traditionally married, children are not forthcoming. Then the man wants to divorce the woman because the woman cannot give birth. Does the traditional setup allow for any kind of examination of the man too to identify whether the fault is coming from the man, so that it is not the case always that the woman is divorced on the grounds of infertility. Thank you.
In the past, we could not have any way of assessing which of them is at fault so far as fertility is concerned. Unfortunately, most of the time, it's the woman who was blamed. And there are instances after the woman has left the marriage, she goes to have a second marriage and she has children. And there are instances also that, for example, a woman from a royal family, if she's married to you and you're not having child with her, the family can come for the woman. Because the family, if it happens to be maternal inheritance, also wants children for the royal family, because that's one purpose of marrying her to you. Her offsprings are royals who will take care of the stool in future, and therefore there are instances where the woman and her family can also call for the dissolution of the marriage because of that. So it's not an iron cast rule that whenever there is no issue in marriage, the woman was blamed. So we must also be careful creating the impression it's always the woman. But on the grounds of childlessness, any of them can call for dissolution of the marriage.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sarkodie. St. Peter's Voice is a flagship project of St. Peter's Regional Seminary here in Cape Coast, an initiative of staff, that is faculty and seminarians, our wonderful staff members and our wonderful, equally wonderful seminarians, where we try in as much as possible, humanly possible, to break down theological jargon to the understanding of the man on the street. It's meant for the man and the woman on the street. Father Dr. Joseph Opon. Father Dr. Joseph Opon, you were mentioning Holy Communion, Eucharist. To the man on the street, what is Holy Communion? What is the Eucharist all about? How special is it? What is it? Thank you.
So the Eucharist in Catholic teaching is the body and blood of Christ. It is the food that sustains us in our journey of faith. We have a lot about the Eucharist in John's Gospel chapter 6, the discourse on the Eucharist. Jesus Christ telling the Israelites, your ancestors ate manna in the desert and he died. I am the true bread. And so in Catholic tradition, the Eucharist is the food that sustains us. It nourishes us. And we have the Eucharist within the context of the celebration of the Mass. And it is something very, very important for Catholics. Catholics must feed on the body and blood of Christ. He tells us, if you don't feed on my body and blood, you have no life in you. Not that you have some life in you. He says you have no life in you. And so for us Catholics, the Eucharist is very, very important. And that's what we go to do when we go to church. We encounter God and we receive him in the Eucharist. It becomes our spiritual food. It becomes our nourishment. It becomes food for the journey. In some contexts called viaticum, the food for our journey. And so the Eucharist is very, very important for many Catholics. But like the other host was trying to ask, it looks like marriage becomes an avenue or becomes a place where people sometimes are cut off from the sacramental life of the church, where they are unable to receive the Eucharist because they have not married in church. So basically, this is what the Eucharist is all about. It's about the body and blood of Christ. Food for the journey.
Body and blood of Christ, food for the journey. Thank you, Father. Sorry, Dr. Sarkodie, is there any equivalent of the Holy Eucharist, Holy Communion equivalent, so to say, among the traditional African believers?
Practitioners of African traditional religion Eucharist. But if you want to get equivalences of this form of communion of all practitioners, the sacred words of God, the God's ancestors, we have this thing to the festivals. Every festival that we celebrate The sacrifices are due. And the living, the dead, and all the things that come together to it. And before you participate in some of these ritual things, there are certain conditions you must fulfill. You must be free from sin. You shouldn't have committed any murder. You shouldn't have broken any taboo. And there are instances that you may even be asked to confess your sins before you participate in that. Because there is the belief that if you have participated in any unlawful act that makes your body to be taboo or dead, now that you are going to participate in eating a meal with the sacred, regarding to be holy, you may make the sacred, so to speak, dirty too. So you are unqualified to participate in this. Moreover, whenever sin is committed and the rituals are performed to remove the sin, after confession or admittance of guilt, and all the rituals have been done, in certain cultures, food is prepared, the sacrifice is offered, the food is prepared. The blood of the animal will be used to cleanse the body of the sinner, because sin makes somebody to be dead, the sinner to be dead. So you need to be purified of the sins. And after the purification, the animal is used, part is used to prepare a ritual meal, where you, the sinner, and the one you sin against, and the gods that you sin against, the human being that you sin against, the God you sin against, and you, the sinner, and some include your family, you also come together to participate in the meal as a form of reconciliation. So we may have equivalences, but here you partake in eating the meal with the sacred as a form of restoring any breaking relationship between you and the sacred, and between you and other fellow humans. This is where we can talk about equivalences.
Wow, interesting. Interesting. Father Okon, one of our viewers online, Godson by name, is asking if a traditionally married couple, one is a Catholic, the other is not, at the point of death, if the Catholic requests for Holy Communion, will it be administered to him or her?
So the Catholic at the point of death is asking to receive the Holy Eucharist. I don't think the Catholic can receive the Holy Eucharist because already the marriage has not been solemnized in the church. Probably as first, what the priest can do is to go there and pray and bless the person. But to give the Eucharist or anoint the person will not be something that can be done. Because like my colleague explained, there are rules, there are norms, there are prohibitions here and there. So if the person has not gone through the norms or has not gone through the laws of the community, then the person cannot receive some, so to speak, privileges out there in the community. So if the Catholic has not solemnized the marriage at the point of death, I think what the priest can do is go there and pray and bless the person, but not to give the Eucharist, because the Eucharist is only given to those who are in a state of grace. The Eucharist is given to those who have prepared themselves. And in this case, the man might prepare himself, but he's still married to a woman, and the marriage has not come before the church. So even though the man may have resolved or any other thing, still that marriage is pending. So it becomes very problematic. What we can do is probably if the man has performed the traditional rites and the woman is there and they want to, probably with dispensation, from the bishop, probably they may have something either at the hospital or at home that may enable the man to receive the Eucharist. But just calling the priest to receive the Eucharist, I don't think that is something that can be done. Yeah.
Thank you. So another person, Nana Nyakwa Gold, is asking, after the traditional marriage, in case the person goes to court to sign with the partner without the blessing of the church, can he or she, or can they partake in the Eucharist court marriage?
Thank you for that question. That's also very important we must know that Catholics, we belong to a family, a big family, and the family has its own rules. So, Nana, I'm sorry, if you go to court to have that married, it doesn't hold in the Catholic Church. So, Catholics must always have their marriages blessed in the Catholic Church. Marriages that are signed up in the court do not have validity in the church. You can't use that to receive the Holy Eucharist. And what we do in the church is accepted by the court, by the country Ghana. And so you don't have to go through that trouble as a Catholic to go to court before you come to the church. Come to the church, the marriage is celebrated in church, and we take part of the documents to the district assembly to the court. And the state accepts that. So Catholics, please don't waste time. Don't go to traditional marriage. Don't go to the court and think that that is enough. The church does not recognize that. Because again, with the court marriage, there could be divorce. The church accepts, the court accepts that, but the country does not accept that. So Nana, please don't go to court. Come to the church. Have your marriage blessed in church. And the church will take care of that, and the state recognize your marriage.
Thank you. Our discussion is getting interesting, but unfortunately, we have just 5 minutes to wrap up. So we come in with some concluding questions, and then we'll encourage our viewers that they follow for the next episode. We are hoping to have a next episode to continue. Father, my final question to you: what is the fate of our faithful who have not performed the sacramental marriage? I have been in the church all this while, been faithful in all angles, just that they have not performed the sacrament of holy matrimony. What is the fate of these people?
Their faith is in their hands. The church has offered them the opportunity. What they need to do is to avail themselves to receive the sacrament in the church. If you have gone through the traditional marriage, what stops you from receiving the marriage in church? And please, pastors, let's make sure we guide our parishioners, we guide our members. Sometimes people are scared of church marriage because they are very, very expensive. Please, let's discourage that. Catholic marriage shouldn't be very expensive. Let us focus on the essentials. What is the essential? The consent. What is the essential? Receiving the body and blood of Christ. Not a huge cake, not those dresses and suits and bow ties. These are just something that is out there. So let us encourage our parishioners so they can receive the Holy Eucharist, because their faith is in their own hands. They have to come to the church, they have to accept the rules, the norms of the church, have their marriage solemnized in church, and receive the Holy Eucharist.
Thank you, Father. Dr. Harper, what would be your personal advice to our young men and women out there who are preparing to enter into marriage?
Well, for the indigenous African perspective, before you can even think of marriage, one thing you have to know is that am I responsible enough to take care of the woman? Am I prepared psychologically, financially, and everything before we step into the marriage? Because as soon as you get into that union, it's a sign of maturity, a sign that you can shoulder every responsibility in marriage, including child. And most of the time, traditional marriage, like Reverend Dr. Opam said, it's not supposed to be expensive. Many of the things which we now ask people to bring are something we take from the Western world. Some the traditional marriage you can see now becoming incorporating of something from the West and something from our tradition. I must even say that up to recently, Shinab and all these things, we not have a traditional marriage. Traditional African marriage is Shinab, whiskey, and all these things there. Every country, depending on the drink, I can't people use palm wine, Madam Pito, and these were simple things that they were using. When you go to northern part of Ghana, some of them we have very expensive dance where as part of the dowry cows and animals, that's where become very expensive. But even then, when I give a cow to somebody, my wife, this a cow is kept in the family. So that if a male from the family is married, that one is also used to marry. So there were a whole lot of things that we're doing. But nowadays, I believe the traditional marriage is also very, very expensive. And there is high time that we need to sit down as a culture and revise many things. Because if you go to the past, it wasn't all that expensive. And other thing also I'll ask the families to do is not to intrude so much. Yes, marriage is a union between two families, but as much as possible, we should allow the couple to enjoy their marriage without too much interference from this. You will make mistakes certainly. The family is there to help them when they fall together. But we should not interfere so much. It is a wonderful institution. Any young man who wants to marry in the traditional African way can go ahead and do that. Because I must say that the Constitution of Ghana recognizes it as a legitimate marriage. But if you are a Catholic, you have their terms and conditions. And you decide to join that group, and they will tell you these are Matis and Masis. So if you don't want to be a Catholic, you don't go there. That's what the Catholic is, the Eucharist. But when you are going there, it's like club you're going to join. Every association has its own rules and regulations. So be conversant with the rules and regulations of any group that you're going to join before you join. And if the thing being there is not helpful to you and you want to go kind of set the terms and conditions, you are free. The church will not force you to stay there. I'm not a Catholic, but I'll say that grace is for everybody, whether you participate in the Eucharist or not. When the church allows you to do that, I believe the grace of God will decide. I'm not a Catholic. My theology will be wrong. Anyway.
Thank you very much. We must admit that this evening has been a very wonderful one. We thank our viewers for joining us. We want to assure you that there will be an episode to continue and to delve deeper into the conversation. So we wish you all a blessed night and thank you for joining us. We thank our guests for making time to join us this evening. Madam and then Dr. Sarkodie, we are grateful to you very much and we appreciate all your inputs. We are hoping to learn more from you. Thank you very much.